We're back for panel 5, improving service delivery. The moderator is Bob Weathers. Bob Weathers is Chief Research Officer in the Office of Retirement and Disability Policy at SSA. He has a PhD in economics from Syracuse. His research focuses on the design and evaluation of random assignment demonstration projects. Thanks for serving as moderator. Bob, take over.
All right, thank you, Dr. Leitner. This session has 3 very interesting papers related to Social Security service delivery. The papers address the agency's evidence-building priorities specified in its fiscal years 2022 through 2026 learning agenda, which was developed in response to the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018. The Social Security fiscal years 2022 through 2026 learning agenda is available at www.ssa.gov/data. Our first presenter today is Monica Farid. Monica is a researcher at Mathematica Policy Research and has a PhD in health policy from Harvard University. Her work focuses on the economic well-being of people with disabilities, primary care and care delivery transformation, and policies affecting the Medicaid and Medicare population. She has expertise in quasi-experimental study design and impact evaluation, and she'll be presenting findings from her project, Effects of Suspending In-Person Services at SSA Field Offices on Disability Applications and Allowances. Our second presenter is J.P. Aubry, who is an Associate Director of State and Local Research at the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. He has a Master's of Science degree in Finance from Boston College and is recognized as a leading expert on public pensions. He has co-authored numerous studies that have received broad attention and is co-founder of the Public Plans Data. He oversees and conducts research and data collection and develops new analytic techniques for evaluating retirement benefits. He'll be presenting findings from his project using online tools to improve SSA service delivery. Our third presenter is John Schwabish, who is a senior fellow within the Income and Benefits Policy Center at the Urban Institute. He has a PhD in economics from Syracuse University and has conducted important research on earnings and income inequality, immigration, disability insurance, retirement security, data measurement, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and other aspects of public policy. He's considered a leader in data visualization field and is a leading voice for clarity and accessibility in research. He helps nonprofits, research institutions, and governments at all levels improve how they communicate their work and findings to their partners, constituents, and citizens. He'll be presenting findings from his project, Understanding the Characteristics and Needs of Tribal Community Members for Social Security Service Delivery. Each speaker will have 12 minutes. I will alert speakers when they have 1 minute remaining. Questions may be submitted using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Let's get the presentation started with Monica and presenting your findings from her project. Monica, if you'd like to pull your presentation up.
Great. Can folks see my presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. Thanks all for the opportunity to present our RDRC project, which investigates the effect of suspending in-person services at SSA field offices on disability applications and allowances. This is work with Michael Anderson and Gina Freeman at Mathematica and with Chris Earles at SSA. All the opinions expressed in this presentation are our own. So SSA has historically provided in-person services to applicants who need them or prefer them. These services are provided at more than 1,200 field offices nationwide. And as you can see from the red bar on the figure, in March 2020, SSA closed its offices to the public to protect the health of the community, and they remained closed all the way through March of 2022. During this period, SSA found ways to expand its remote service delivery options, including installing drop boxes at offices and publishing all the local office phone numbers online. So our research question was, what was the effect of suspending in-person services at field offices on disability applications? And in answering this question, we have 2 goals. The first is specific. we'd like to better understand the effect of COVID-19 on applications and on applicants. But the suspension of in-person services is also something that we can exploit in order to gain insight into questions about barriers to access and program participation more generally. The first component of our empirical approach is descriptive. We investigate how applicant characteristics vary by mode of application. We define 3 modes: in person, online, and by phone. And then we compare the characteristics of applicants that use each of these 3 modes. Next, we investigate how the likelihood of initial allowance varies by mode of application after controlling for applicant and local area characteristics, such as the demographic composition and baseline economic conditions of counties in which applicants live. And the idea there is to understand if the mode itself is associated with likelihood of allowance. And both the analysis I just described are restricted to applications that occurred pre-pandemic. The second component of our analysis involves estimating the causal effects of the suspension of in-person services by using difference in differences. For this, we'll aggregate the data to the county border level. We'll compare counties with a field office with a matched set of counties without a field office. That's our first difference. And the second difference is looking before and after the suspension of in-person services in March 2020. So we assume that people who live close to field office are more affected by the suspension of in-person services than people who live far away from a field office. We can therefore use the latter group as a comparison group. And this empirical approach hopefully enables us to isolate the effects of the suspension of in-person services from other aspects of the pandemic that might have affected applications, such as the unemployment rate, stimulus checks, and many other factors. We'll investigate effects on the volume of applications, initial allowance rates, and the demographic composition of applicants. So those are our main outcomes there. We're using 5 main sources of data on this project. 2 of them are SSA data sources and 3 are publicly available data sources. Our main data source is SSA's structured data repository, which includes information on application mode, applicant's education, age, disabling condition, and determination outcomes. We'll also add to our analysis information from SSA's electronic claims analysis tool, which tends to have richer information on applicant work history compared to the SDR. The publicly available data we're using are field office address locations from ssa.gov, the American Community Survey, from which we obtain information on the urbanicity, demographic composition, and baseline economic condition of counties. And finally, the New York Times GitHub repository, which contains information on COVID-19 cases and deaths over time at the county level. So moving on to our first set of results. As a reminder, in our first analyses, we investigated how applicant characteristics differed by mode. We point folks to the forthcoming working paper for the full set of findings, but I'll just share a few key results. And all the differences I'll describe are statistically significant using a chi-square test. So this figure shows applicant characteristics by mode of application in the months prior to the suspension of in-person services. The bars on the left show the characteristics of applicants who applied in person. The middle set of bars are for people who applied online. And finally, the right set of bars are for people who applied by phone. For each group of applicants, we show the share of applicants with less than a high school education, the share that speak English, the share of white residents in the applicant's county of residence, the share of applicant addresses that are urban rather than rural, and the share of applicants that have a field office in their county. Finally, the line above the bars shows the median household income of the applicant's county of residence. So what we find is that in-person applicants are least likely to have finished high school. 30% have not completed high school compared to 20 and 27% of online and phone applicants. They're also least likely to speak English. While the majority of all applicants speak English, over 90%, a larger share of in-person applicants don't speak English compared to applicants using other modes. In-person applicants also live in counties with lower shares of white residents. Compared to other modes, applying in person could provide the greatest opportunity for receiving assistance, making it a more attractive option to groups of applicants whose disability or background make it more challenging to apply using other modes. Conversely, online applicants were most educated and were most likely to speak English. Compared to applicants using other modes, they also lived in counties with relatively higher median income. Applying online requires familiarity with navigating online forms, which could be correlated with relatively higher levels of education. Finally, phone applicants were most likely to live in rural counties with relatively lower median income and a higher white share of the population. They were also least likely to live in a county with a field office. Next, we investigated whether the way in which the individual applies to SSI or SSDI, for example, in person or by phone, was associated with the likelihood of receiving an initial allowance after controlling for applicants and local area characteristics. We found that online applications were 3 and 4 percentage points less likely to result in an initial allowance relative to phone and in-person applications, respectively. This could indicate that some modes of application facilitate application quality better than others. For example, online applicants may not provide complete answers to questions or may not understand a question correctly. Without in-person or phone assistance, this could hurt an online applicant's chances of an initial allowance. But an important caveat here is that these results are descriptive and are not causal. There may be differences between the applicant groups that we haven't controlled for and that may be driving these differences in allowance rates. Our control variables are also correlated with allowance rates in ways one might expect. We find that older applicants, those with low levels of education, and those with a mental disability are more likely to receive an initial allowance. In the second component of our analysis, we investigated the causal effect of in-person suspensions on total applications and on applicant characteristics. We matched counties with a field office to those without a field office, and then implemented the difference in differences analysis I described earlier. Prior to matching, counties with a field office differed from those without a field office in important ways, which are listed on this slide. Post-matching, the differences in the demographic compositions, urbanicity, and baseline economic conditions between the two sets of counties were not statistically significant or were significant but not meaningfully large. All right, so this slide shows our difference in difference results. The results are preliminary and may be refined as we conduct our checks. The outcome variable here is the number of applications per 10,000 county residents. And the figure is showing the difference between counties with a field office and the matched set of counties without a field office relative to the difference in the first quarter of 2020. So as you can see, prior to the first quarter of 2020, counties with a field office have similar trends to the matched control group. The exception is Q1 2019, and we're still investigating what might be driving that difference. The effect we see in the second quarter of 2020 represents an 8.6% decrease in applications attributable to the suspension of in-person services. This decrease is slightly smaller in the subsequent quarters at about 5.5%. It's possible that SSA's efforts to expand remote service delivery options over time mitigated the initial effects of the in-person service suspensions. Together, our results imply that the suspension of in-person services causally reduced applications. Our results are aligned with prior work. Deshpande and Lee find that the closing of SSA field offices led to a 10% decline in applications in the surrounding areas. Our analyses examining the effect of in-person service suspensions on applicant characteristics and allowance rates are underway. However, descriptive work that we've done indicates that after the suspension of in-person services at field offices, the share of applicants with less than a high school education decreased. This potentially suggests that the suspension of in-person services may have affected certain disadvantaged groups, such as those with low levels of education, more than others. Our results have several policy implications. First, we find that different groups of applicants use different modes of application. This could have access and equity implications for policies that aim to expand or reduce the use and take-up of certain application modes. Indeed, we find that the suspension of in-person services causally reduced applications. Not everyone who wanted to apply was able to apply using alternative modes of application. Applicants with low levels of education may have been affected more than other applicants. And policies that aim to raise awareness and use of online services could significantly reduce application barriers to many eligible individuals. However, it's possible that they may help some groups of people more than others.
1 minute.
Thanks. Second, our results indicate the mode of application could be related to application quality. There could be several potential reasons for this. For example, when applying in person or over the phone, assistance from an SSA employee could help ensure that questions are answered as completely as possible. Further work is definitely needed to better understand how mode affects the completeness and quality of SSI or SSDI applications, and whether some modes are best suited to some groups of applicants more than others. And this could, ultimately inform potential application supports, such as access to an online chat with an SSA employee for modes of application that tend to be associated with relatively lower application quality. But again, I want to mention the caveat that our results, that is the differences in the adjusted rates of initial allowance could be driven by differences in applicant characteristics that we couldn't control for. All right, thanks very much, everyone. And I'll pass it back to Bob.
Thank you, Monica. Great presentation. Next up is JP Aubry. JP, would you like to pull up your presentation?
Can everyone see my presentation?
No,
No,
not yet.
one more time here. One moment. I'll try one more time here. That's right. That's why. How about now?
Perfect. Yes,
Okay.
now, yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, everyone, and really pleased and excited to present recent research that I completed on using online tools to improve SSA service delivery. I start with the standard disclaimer that the results and conclusions expressed in this research are mine and mine alone. So for today's brief presentation, I'll be covering 4 topics. The first is a brief summary of SSA service delivery and online tools. The next, we'll discuss the survey instrument that was produced in order to analyze and assess how individuals use SSA online tools. Then we'll discuss the results through describing respondents' claiming process. And finally, look at retirees' self-reported satisfaction with their claiming process, which was also asked in the survey. So online tools are a great way to improve SSA service delivery. They streamline the claiming process for retirees. It reduces administrative burden for SSA field offices, and it can help maintain services during emergencies such as the recent COVID pandemic. But the share of retirees claiming OASI online has grown minimally since 2012. What this figure shows here is a share of the total applications received that were filed via the internet. And so there was an increase from, a pretty dramatic increase from 2007 to about 2012. And since then, it's kind of hovered around 50% with an increase, obviously, during the pandemic that has sustained to maybe closer to 60%. So to investigate this trend, we asked retirees and near retirees about their use of SSA's online tools throughout their claiming process. And what I mean by that is we asked whether they communicate with SSA online, by phone, or in person before they claimed, whether they claimed online or in person, and whether they communicated with SSA online, by phone, or in person after claiming. So that way we really get the whole process throughout our survey. And then finally, we asked them to rank their claiming experience on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most satisfied. The survey instrument also asks for valuable details about the claiming process. So for those who submitted their application online, the survey asked if they did so from home or a field office or another public location, for example, a library. For those who failed or never tried to submit their application online, we asked what were the reasons that they didn't claim. For those who contacted SSA before or after, we asked for those reasons as well. And then for those who ranked their satisfaction with the claiming experience, we also asked them if they had any suggestions for improving the claiming experience for retirees. So from this survey instrument, the first major takeaway I'd like to discuss is that although we see that about 50%, maybe more, of retirees ultimately file via the internet, our survey suggests that only around 40% claim totally online. That means, without contacting SSA in person or by phone beforehand or afterwards, right? So I think that was kind of a major insight that came from the survey that we found that was the first major takeaway. Another major takeaway was that non-white retirees are less likely to claim totally online. So when we looked at the respondents and separated them into racial categories, focusing on white, Black, and Hispanic because they were the largest three categories in our sample, we found that both Black and Hispanic individuals were less likely to claim totally online. Again, that's without contacting SSA at any point through their process than white. And the difference was statistically significant. When we looked into the reasons that individuals cited for contacting SSA, we found they could be divided into two broad categories. Those that are more amenable to policy solutions, for example, obstacles to using SSA online services, such as data errors or general lack of awareness regarding online tools, or basic inquiries about benefits, most of which may be possibly handled online, figuring out basic eligibility or getting a sense of your basic benefit levels. And then there are reasons that the respondents provided that we thought were less amenable to policy solutions. For example, complex inquiries regarding issues like spousal benefits or the tax implications of receiving Social Security income, or just a general distrust of online tools or a preference for in-person interaction. Those reasons were a little more difficult for us to see a policy solution. And when we look more closely at the reasons within these two categories by race, we found that Hispanics are more likely to contact SSA for basic benefits or data errors, particularly before they claim. So these are two reasons that we had placed in the more amenable to policy solutions categories, right? Kind of just getting some basic information about the process or correcting errors, getting basic benefit information. Those two reasons were why Hispanics contacted SSA. When we looked at reasons for contacting SSA during the application process, what we found is that for most reasons, there weren't many differences by race that were statistically significant, other than in terms of comfort using the internet. And so Black individuals were more likely to apply in person due to discomfort using the internet or unfamiliarity with the internet and computers. But otherwise, the reasons were not very different across race. So when we think about the policy solutions and the various reasons that Black or Hispanic individuals contact SSA, during the claiming process more often than whites. When we kind of basically remove those reasons as a reason for contacting SSA in our analysis, we can get some sense of what a policy solution that would address those issues might do, right? And so when we do so, what we found was, in general, the share of respondents contacting SSA drops, right? Currently, we see about 57% of the respondents say they contact SSA at some point in their claiming process. If you remove the reasons that we categorize in the more amenable to policy solutions, if you remove those reasons, you find that only 37% of individuals would have to contact SSA. And in addition to the overall decrease in contact with SSA during the claiming process, these, if you reduce these reasons for contacting SSA, you actually reduce the racial differences as well in contacting SSA, especially between whites and Hispanics, which is driven in part by the fact that Hispanic individuals are more likely to contact SSA, at least in our survey, for reasons like data errors and getting basic benefit eligibility information, both elements and reasons that we've categorized as being more amenable to policy solutions. Moving on to the satisfaction with claiming, you know, the major takeaway here from the survey was that satisfaction with the claiming process is high. You know, the average score, self-reported satisfaction score by respondents was 8.4%, right? And it's heavily skewed upward. You know, 70% of individuals report a score higher than 8, or almost 80% score higher than 8. And so very few had a poor satisfaction score in terms of their experience with claiming. And just over 20% of retirees thought SSA needed to improve services. So we also had a follow-up question after individuals provided their claiming score, or their satisfaction score, and asked them if they'd like to give any suggestions, right, about SSA's service delivery. And only 20% felt the need to suggest improvements, and which I find is also a good sign in terms of people's overall claiming experience. And importantly, there really was not any statistically significant difference across race. You know, it's all right around 20% or a quarter of individuals provided any feedback, and 15% provided positive feedback in most cases. And the vast majority just said no suggestion, everything is okay. Finally, among the 20% that did provide some suggestions, what was the most common was reducing wait times. So here we kind of have a chart that categorizes the most common reasons among the 20% who provided a reason at all, or a suggestion at all. And we found that wait times was by far the most common suggestion. After that was providing more instruction on the process, allowing in-person visits. Clearly those were for those who were claiming during COVID. Improving services, follow-up communication, but those are much smaller relative to wait times, which almost 20% of individuals who provided suggestion listed as a possible improvement.
1 minute.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah, perfect
under
time.
time.
Well done, JP.